moment nobody believed in him was not loud or dramatic. It did not come with arguments or harsh words. It arrived quietly, like a cold realization settling into his chest. And if you are listening right now, feeling unseen, unsupported, or tired of fighting alone, then listen carefully, because this story may sound uncomfortably familiar. Alex was never the kind of person people pointed at and said he would do something great one day. He was ordinary in every visible way, born into an average family, raised in an environment where survival mattered more than dreams, and taught from a young age to be careful, realistic, and safe. But deep inside him lived a dream that refused to be quiet, a dream that felt bigger than logic, bigger than comfort, and much bigger than the life he was currently living. Every morning Alex woke up with hope, quietly sitting beside his bed. Not loud hope, not motivational poster hope, but a fragile belief that if he kept going, something would eventually change. And every night, that hope felt bruised, not destroyed, just tired. Because the days passed with effort but no recognition, work but no applause, struggle but no visible reward. Friends moved on with their lives, choosing safe paths, stable jobs, predictable futures. Relatives asked him the same questions again and again. What's your plan? When will you settle down? How long will you keep trying this? Some asked out of concern, others out of doubt. But every question carried the same hidden message. We don't believe this will work. At first, Alex tried to convince them. He explained his vision with passion. He shared ideas. He talked about where he wanted to go and who he wanted to become. But every explanation drained him a little more, because belief cannot be forced. You cannot make someone see what they are not ready to see. Slowly, he realized something painful, but important. People do not support beginnings. They support results. They clap when the finish line is visible, not when the road is still dark. The loneliness didn't arrive all at once. It grew quietly. Conversations became shorter. Encouragement faded. Messages stopped coming. And one day, Alex noticed something that scared him more than failure. He noticed that even when he achieved something small, there was no one to share it with. No one who truly cared. That kind of loneliness does not scream. It sits with you in silence and asks dangerous questions. Questions like, why am I doing this? Is this even worth it? What if everyone else is right and I am wrong? One night, after another long day that felt invisible to the world, Alex sat alone in his room. The light was dim. The room was quiet. His phone lay face down beside him. Silent. No messages. No encouragement. No reminder that anyone believed in him. And for the first time, the idea of quitting felt peaceful. Not painful. Peaceful. Quitting meant rest. Quitting meant no more explaining. Quitting meant no more disappointment. For a few moments, quitting felt like freedom, but then a different thought entered his mind. Slow and calm, not emotional, not loud. Ask it. If you quit now, will you be free, or will you be trapped by regret? That question stayed with him. He imagined himself years later, older, looking back at this exact moment. He imagined the version of himself that quit, living a safe life but always wondering what could have been. And he imagined the version of himself that kept going, still struggling, still alone, but honest with himself. That night, Alex made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not something he posted online, not something he told anyone about. He decided that he would keep going even if nobody supported him, even if nobody clapped, even if nobody understood. He decided that his belief in himself would have to be enough. The next morning, the world looked the same. The doubts were still there. The silence was still there. The lack of support had not magically disappeared, but something inside Alex had shifted. When you stop waiting for approval, you reclaim your energy. When you stop seeking validation, your focus sharpens. And when you accept loneliness as part of the journey, it stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like training. Alex began to work quietly. No announcements, no explanations, no expectations from anyone else. He woke up early. He learned every day. He failed privately. He improved slowly. Some days he felt strong. Some days he felt weak. But he showed up anyway, because he had learned something powerful. Motivation comes and goes, but discipline stays if you train it. There were days when nothing worked. Days when progress felt invisible. Days when he questioned his decision again. But this time, he didn't quit. Because quitting was no longer an option he entertained. It was a door he had closed intentionally. And closed doors stop distracting you. If you are still listening to this story and it feels like it's speaking directly to your life, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to English. Not because of algorithms, but because stories like this exist to remind people that they are not alone, even when it feels that way. As weeks turned into months, something subtle began to happen. Alex started trusting himself, not because he had succeeded yet, but because he had proven one thing to himself. He could continue without support, and that realization is dangerous in the best possible way. Because once you know you can survive alone, fear loses much of its power over you. Small results appeared quietly. Not success stories, not life-changing wins. Just small confirmations that effort was not wasted. A skill improving. A door opening slightly, an opportunity that didn't exist before. Nobody celebrated these moments with him. But he did, because progress does not need an audience to be real. And slowly, without him noticing at first, the silence around him began to change. People who once doubted him started watching more closely. Not supporting who's watching, because consistency always attracts attention eventually. But the most important change had already happened. Alex was no longer doing this for approval. He was doing it because quitting was no longer who he was. Time is a quiet way of testing whether a decision is real or just emotional, and the weeks that followed became a silent examination of Alex's promise to himself. Nothing suddenly became easier. In fact, some days felt heavier than before, because once you choose to keep going without support, you remove every excuse that once protected you from responsibility. Now, every result, every failure, every slow moment belonged only to him. At first, that truth felt frightening, like standing alone in a wide open space with nowhere to hide. But slowly, that same space began to feel like freedom. His routine stayed simple, almost invisible to the outside world. Wake up early while the city was still quiet. Work while others complained. Learn while others scrolled. Practiced while others waited for the perfect moment. Sleep knowing he had moved one step forward, even if that step was too small for anyone else to notice. The world celebrates loud victories, but real transformation is usually silent, and Alex was living inside that silence every single day. There were mornings when doubt returned without warning. Not loud doubt, but soft whispers asking familiar questions. What if this still doesn't work? What if you are wasting your best years? What if nobody ever notices? Those questions didn't disappear just because he made a decision, but something important had changed. He no longer believed every thought that entered his mind. He had learned that thoughts are not commands, they are just visitors. And visitors can be ignored. One afternoon, after weeks of effort that still looked small from the outside, Alex experienced a moment that almost broke his confidence again. Someone close to him achieved quick success in a safe, traditional path. Celebration filled the room. Smiles, praise, pride, certainty, and for a brief second, comparison wrapped around his heart like a tight grip. He wondered if choosing the difficult road had been a mistake. He wondered if loneliness was the price of being wrong. Comparison is dangerous because it hides inside reasonable logic. It tells you to be practical, to be smart, to avoid risk. And for a few hours, Alex felt pulled toward that safe direction. But later that night, when everything became quiet again, he asked himself a different question. Not which path is easier, not which path is faster, but which path feels honest. And the answer was clear. The difficult road was still the only one that felt true to who he wanted to become. So the next morning, he continued. Not with excitement, not with dramatic motivation, just with calm commitment. And calm commitment is stronger than excitement, because excitement fades when emotions change. But commitment survives ordinary days. Months kept moving forward, and something subtle began to grow inside him. Patience. Real patience. Not the kind people talk about, but the kind built from repeated waiting without quitting. He stopped asking when success would come. He stopped measuring progress every single day. Instead, He focused on becoming the kind of person who would be ready when opportunity finally arrived. Because deep down he had realized something powerful. Success is not only about reaching the right moment, it is about becoming the right person before that moment appears. Slowly, skills improved. Confidence became quieter but stronger. Fear still existed, but it no longer controlled his actions. He began to notice that loneliness itself was changing shape. What once felt like emptiness now felt like space. Space to think clearly. Space to grow. Privately, space to build a life without constant outside noise. And in that space, he discovered something surprising. Peace. Not perfect happiness. Not endless motivation. Just steady peace. The peace of knowing he was no longer betraying his own potential. The peace of knowing he was still moving, even when the world was not watching. And that peace became fuel stronger than praise could ever be. If this part of the journey feels similar to something you are experiencing in your own life, stay with this story, because the quiet middle of the road is where most people disappear. But it is also where the strongest versions of ourselves are created. And if you believe more people need to hear reminders like this, take a second to share this message with someone who might be struggling silently right now. Sometimes one story, heard at the right moment, can change the direction of an entire life. As another season passed, the first meaningful opportunity finally appeared. Not dramatic. Not life-changing overnight. Just a small door opening where there had once been only a wall. The kind of opportunity most people might ignore because it looked too small to matter. But Alex understood something different now. Small doors lead to larger rooms if you are patient enough to walk through them. He gave everything he had to that small time, focus, effort, energy. Not because anyone was watching, but because he had promised himself he would treat every step seriously. And for the first time, the results felt slightly different. Not huge, but real. Real enough to prove that the road he chose was not empty. That moment didn't turn him into a success story, but it did something more important. It removed the final illusion that quitting would have been easier, because now he could clearly see that progress was possible. Slow, difficult, lonely, but possible. And once possibility becomes visible, persistence becomes natural. Still, the journey was far from finished. New challenges waited ahead. Bigger tests, harder decisions, moments that would require even deeper belief. Because growth never stops at the first sign of progress. It only asks a new question. Are you ready for the next level of difficulty that comes with becoming who you asked to be? Alex didn't know the full answer yet. But he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the person who needed support to continue. And that realization changed everything that was about to happen next. Growth rarely announces itself when it arrives. It does not knock on the door or send a message saying everything is about to change. Most of the time, growth is invisible while it is happening, and only becomes clear when you look back and realize you are no longer the same person who once felt so unsure. That quiet transformation had already begun inside Alex, even before the world had any evidence of it. The small opportunity he accepted slowly turned into responsibility. Responsibility turned into pressure, and pressure turned into moments that tested whether his patience was truly real or only temporary. There were days when mistakes happened, days when progress moved backward instead of forward, days when exhaustion made every step feel heavier than the last. And during those moments, the old voice of doubt tried to return, reminding him how easy it would be to stop. But something important had changed inside him. Before, doubt felt like a command. Now, it felt like noise. He still heard it, but he no longer obeyed it, because he had lived long enough in discipline to understand a truth many people never discover. Feelings are temporary, but identity is built by what you do repeatedly, and he had repeated one action more than any other. He kept going, not perfectly, not confidently, every day, but consistently. And consistency has a quiet strength that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. As time continued forward, the results around him began to grow in small but undeniable ways. Skills that once felt difficult became natural. Tasks that once felt confusing became clear. Effort that once felt invisible began creating visible outcomes. People who had never paid attention before slowly started noticing. Not loudly. Just small questions. Small curiosity. Small recognition. It felt strange at first, because he remembered clearly the silence from before. He remembered the loneliness, the doubt, the empty room, and now the same world that once ignored his effort was beginning to look in his direction. Not fully supportive yet, but no longer dismissive. This is one of the quiet ironies of life. The world often stays silent while you are becoming strong enough to live without its approval, and only after you no longer need validation does recognition begin to appear. But the most meaningful change was still happening inside Alex. Success was no longer the only goal. Growth had become the real destination. He was no longer chasing proof for others. He was building proof for himself, and self-respect, once earned, becomes stronger than applause. There came a moment, late one evening, when he paused from his work and simply sat in silence. Not the painful silence from before, but a calm one. And he realized something that almost surprised him. He was no longer afraid of being alone, because he understood now that loneliness had never been empty. It had been training that taught him discipline, patience, focus, emotional strength, the ability to continue without encouragement. And in that quiet realization, he felt something rare. Pride. Not loud pride, not the kind shown to others. Just a deep, peaceful awareness that he had not abandoned himself, when it would have been easy to do so. If you are still listening right now, somewhere in the middle of your own difficult chapter, remember this moment in the story, because the middle is where most people disappear. The beginning has excitement. The ending has reward. But the middle has only uncertainty, and surviving uncertainty is what creates uncommon strength. Another turning point arrived slowly. An opportunity slightly bigger than the last one appeared. This time it carried more risk, more responsibility, more possibility of failure. The safe choice would have been to stay where he was comfortable, but comfort had never been the place where his real life waited. So he stepped forward again, and that step required courage, deeper than before. Because progress raises the stakes. The higher you climb, the more visible failure feels. But he had learned something powerful during his quiet years. Fear does not disappear when you grow. You simply become stronger than the fear. The work became harder. The hours became longer. The expectations became heavier. There were moments when exhaustion returned stronger than ever. Moments when he questioned whether he truly had the strength to continue at this new level. But every time that question appeared, memory answered it. Memory reminded him of the nights he almost quit. The silence he survived. The loneliness he endured. The promise he made to himself when nobody else believed. And that memory became strength. Slowly, results followed effort again. Not instantly. Not easily, but steadily. Doors opened that once seemed locked forever. Conversations changed tone. Respect replaced doubt in quiet, gradual ways. And without chasing recognition, he found himself standing closer to the life he once could only imagine. Yet something surprising happened. The closer he moved towards success, the more clearly he understood that the most important victory had already happened long ago. In that silent room, on the night he decided not to quit, because everything after that moment was simply the result of one decision repeated over time. Keep going. Keep going. If this story is giving you even a small feeling of strength right now, hold on to that feeling, because strength does not always arrive as confidence. Sometimes it arrives as the simple refusal to stop. And your refusal to stop might be the beginning of everything changing. Alex did not know exactly how far this journey would go, but he knew something far more important than certainty. He knew he would continue, and that was enough to carry him into the final chapter that was waiting ahead. The chapter where the quiet struggle would finally reveal its meaning. The final chapter of a difficult journey rarely begins with celebration. Most of the time, it begins quietly, almost invisibly. Just like the first step did. Alex did not wake up one morning suddenly feeling successful. There was no dramatic music, no perfect moment where everything instantly made sense. Instead, there was simply another ordinary day. But something inside that ordinary day felt different. Not because the world had completely changed, but because he had. He moved through his work with a calm confidence that did not need to be shown. The same tasks that once felt overwhelming now felt natural. The same fears that once stopped him now felt smaller, manageable, almost distant. Growth had not removed difficulty from his life, but it had removed the version of him that used to break under pressure. And slowly, without noise, the results he had once only imagined became real enough to touch. Opportunities became steady. Stability replaced uncertainty. Respect replaced doubt. People who once questioned his path now spoke about his persistence. Some called it determination. Some called it discipline. A few even called it inspiration. But Alex understood the truth more clearly than anyone else. None of this had started with talent. None of it had started with support. None of it had started with confidence. It had started with a single quiet decision on a lonely night. The decision to keep going when nobody believed in him. That realization humbled him more than success ever could, because he knew how close he had been to quitting. He remembered the silence, the doubt, the exhaustion, the invisible effort that nobody saw. And he understood that many people never reach this chapter, not because they are incapable, but because they stopped too soon. One evening, long after the hardest years had passed, Alex found himself sitting alone again in a quiet room. The scene looked similar to the night everything once felt hopeless, but the feeling inside him was completely different. Back then, the silence felt heavy. Now, it felt peaceful. Back then, he questioned his worth. Now, he understood his strength, and in that quiet reflection, a powerful truth became clear. The journey had never been only about success. It had been about becoming someone who would not abandon himself, even in the darkest moment. Because real victory is not reaching the top. Real victory is refusing to give up while you are still at the bottom. If you are listening to this right now while fighting a battle nobody else can see, remember this part of the story carefully. The silence you feel today is not proof that you are failing. The loneliness you feel is not proof that you are lost. Sometimes, these are the exact conditions where the strongest transformation begins. There will be days when nobody supports you. Days when nobody understands you. Days when quitting feels peaceful. But those are the days that quietly decide your future. Because every time you continue, instead of stopping, you become someone stronger than you were yesterday. Alex's story did not end with perfection. Life never becomes permanently easy. New challenges still appeared. New fears still arrived. But now he carried something that could not be taken away. Self-trust is more powerful than motivation, more reliable than encouragement, and stronger than temporary success. Because once you truly believe you can survive hard moments, fear loses its control over your life. Years later, when people asked him for advice, expecting complicated strategies or secret formulas, his answer remained simple. Keep going, especially when nobody supports you. Some people smiled politely at that answer, thinking it sounded too simple. But the people who had truly struggled understood immediately. Because they knew the hardest part of any journey is not the work. It is the loneliness that comes before the results. And maybe that is why you are here, listening to this story today. Maybe you are standing in your own quiet chapter. Maybe you are working hard without recognition. Maybe you are close to giving up, even if nobody knows. If that is true, then hear this clearly. Your story is not finished. The chapter you are living right now is not the ending. It is the middle. The part where strength is built in silence. One day, the pain you feel today may become the proof that inspires someone else to survive. One day, the effort nobody notices may become the success everyone sees. One day, you may look back at this difficult season and realize this was the moment that created the strongest version of you. So keep going. Even slowly. Even quietly. Even alone. Because forward is still forward, no matter how small this step. And when the day finally comes, where your life begins to make sense, in a way it never did before, don't forget to return and share your story in the comments. Someone else, somewhere in the world, might be sitting in the same silence you once felt, and your words could be the reason they decide not to quit. If this story touched your heart in any way, share it with someone who needs strength tonight. And remember to stay connected with English or Time, where every story is created to remind you that even the quietest struggles can lead to the most powerful endings. Most importantly, never forget this simple truth. As long as you are still trying, your story is still alive. And as long as your story is still alive, something beautiful is still possible.